Well, we're in trouble if we had to worry about God, right?
Right.
So Nathanael said in verse 3, God, do all that in your mind, for the Lord is with you. So Nathan said to Saul, that's a brilliant idea. Go ahead and do it. Well, the problem was that Nathan hadn't checked with God. That's a good idea to check with God before you open your mouth.
Right.
To speak for God. See, what David said was a good idea, and Nathan said, that's a real good idea, why don't you do it?
Yep.
But he forgot to talk to God first. So he exercised some independent authority, and he told David that was a very good idea, which, as we see, in fact, he hadn't even asked the Lord about this matter at all. So I should say, would you pray about this matter and then give me an answer later? But we want to jump in and give our opinion before we ask God, because we think we know God well enough that we know what God wants us to do, but we haven't asked God. So it came about in the same night, the word of the Lord came to Nathan. I'm glad. So, and Nathan comes to him that very night, and God comes to him that very night and says, say, Nathan, there's another message that I need to give you, to give to David, and that's the one I'll give him. Don't you just hate that? Don't you just hate to give your opinion of what God wants you to do, and you tell someone what you think God wants them to do, and you go home and you say, Lord, I forgot to consult you first. I forgot to consult my wife first. And I gave you what I was going to do, but sometimes we say something, and boy, it's happened to me in recent. I made a decision on my own to do something, and I was so excited about doing it. I almost put my name on the paper, and I thought, well, maybe I need to consult the person that I need to consult to confirm that it's okay. So I made a phone call to that person, and that person confirmed to me that's not what he wanted me to do. You talking about being the air being blown out of you. I already told this one person, I'm going to do it, I'll give you the check to get it done, but when I consulted with the person that I needed to, he said no. So I had to go back and tell the other person, I got another message from the person, and he said, I can't do it. And man, I was whining for at least, I'm still whining over the situation. And I happened, so you go say to my servant David, thus saith the Lord, this time Nathan, are you the one who should build me the house to dwell in? Are you the one who should build the house to dwell in? Really? Are you kidding me? God said. You mean to tell me that you think you're the man who is qualified to build me a house? You, David? You are a warrior. You're a man of slaughter. I am not going to give you the privilege. I have not dwelt in your house since the days I brought up the sons of Israel from Egypt, even to this day. I've been moving about in the tent, even in a tabernacle, wherever I have gone with all the sons of Israel, that I speak the words with one of the tribe of Israel. In other words, he was saying in these verses, I have not dwelt in the tabernacle or in a tent. He says, I've been with you in and out. He says, I took you from the pasture, from the sheep. David, you do remember that you were a shepherd, don't you? And I did tell you that you was going to be a ruler over my people, didn't I? And I've been with you wherever you've gone, and have cut off all your enemies from before you, and I will make you a great name like the names of the great men who are in the earth. David, you're going to have one great name, And that's for sure. You're going to be famous, and that's for sure. And I will appoint a place for my people, Israel. I will plant them. Then in verse 12. And when your days are fulfilled, and you shall sleep with your fathers, I will set up a seed after you, which shall proceed out of thy bowels, and I will establish a kingdom. Verse 13. He shall build a house in my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. He was talking of Solomon, David's son. He's going to build the house. And the Solomon temple was the wonder of wonders. And so God said, you're not going to build the temple. Solomon is. You can raise the money and have all the money ready to build the temple, but you're not going to see that. But I'm going to do better than that. I'm going to build an everlasting temple that's going to last forever, and it's going to come from your seed. Solomon was not a very nice guy. Solomon was, he started out good, but pride got the best of him, and he began to swindle down to being, I think sometimes you got to pray more when you're rich. When God gives you a lot of money, you're more apt to spend it wrong and have nothing at the end of the process. I've seen it over and over again where a person gets an inheritance, and within 2 or 3 years they've spent their inheritance, go in debt, and have to give up everything they've got. Solomon became rich and all the riches, and what happened was he lost his kingdom. By the time Solomon died, there was 2 kingdoms. And by the time, as we see it, eventually that both kingdoms got destroyed. Yep. And for 1900 years, Israel didn't have a place to dwell. They dwell all over the world. So now you go to the near present fulfillment in which Solomon did build a temple to the far fulfillment of eternal kingdom. So, in verse 14, Solomon is the son here, and he did a lot of wrong things. In verse 16, it refers to the Messiah who will establish a kingdom enduring forever with the throne established. And there are some people who want to say, well, the kingdom is gone. So there was a near interpretation, but there's a far application that what God was saying, I will build you an eternal, everlasting kingdom that I will rule and reign the whole world. There's going to come a time that I'm going to come, and when I come, I'm going to restore Israel to its rightful place. I'm going to rule and reign with a rod of iron, and I'm going to be in charge, and Israel will be no longer under the captivity of anybody. So, what they were thinking, Israelites were thinking, they were thinking that when the Messiah comes, what he's going to do, he's going to set up an eternal kingdom. So when they heard that the Messiah was coming, in their mind, this Messiah that was promised to David was going to come and take them out of the reign of the Romans, destroy the Romans, set up his own kingdom, and he was going to rule, and Israel was going to be they were going to be the ones who is going to be in power. And that's what they understood. As a matter of fact, that's what Zacharsias thought. They had been under the servitudes for all these years, and when the Messiah comes, they missed the real point. They thought that the Messiah was going to be the king in the physical sense. That's what they missed. By the way, you can't have a king until you can't have the kingdom until you accept the king. Right. They did not accept the king, therefore they couldn't have the kingdom. So the promise, as we look back, is there will be a king out of David's line who will reign forever. Now, I understand there are 40 verses in the Old Testament connected to this verse in Luke. 1 Chronicles 17, Psalms 89, and you need to go and you need to read all of those. The Jews knew what was coming. They had read Isaiah chapter 9, a child shall be born. They read Psalm 110, and it's real, the first 7 verses. the Davidic promise, there is coming a Messiah. There is a universal promise in Zechariah chapter 14 in verse 9. You need to write that down. Zechariah chapter 14 verse 9. And the Lord shall be king over the earth. In that day shall there be one Lord, and his name one. Now that was the Old Testament promise. So when the Messiah comes, they were looking for a person who's going to come in and be the ruler of the entire world. In the final fulfillment of the Davidic covenant, there is going to be a kingdom. The Lord, the Messiah, will be king of all the earth, a literal earthly kingdom established on earth. If ever there was a time in which I did not believe in the millennial reign of Christ, my mind was settled after studying this sermon. Reformers usually do not accept that there's going to be a millennial kingdom. They believe that Christ fulfilled everything in the Old Testament, therefore there's no need, and the promise to Israel doesn't necessarily be anymore. But after I studied it, there's yet to be the fulfillment where there's going to be a universal kingdom on earth where God rules with a rod of iron. That hasn't happened yet. And God said it's going to happen. But you know, Jesus could have then there established a kingdom. You see, Zacharias in the Old Testament never saw this 2,000-year gap. The Old Testament prophets literally believed that when the Messiah comes, that right then, at that moment, God was going to establish a kingdom right then and right there. They did not see the Jews killing Jesus. They didn't think that was going to happen. But God had another purpose of Jesus coming, not only to establish the kingdom, but to establish the atonement for salvation. They missed that part. So when Jesus came and they rejected Him, they rejected the kingdom, and God put a stop on it. God says, I can't do that. So in Matthew chapter 12, when the Jews rejected Him, He put a stop on His plan, and he turned it over to the Gentiles.